So, I watched the first 2 episodes of Percy Jackson, the Olympians at Disney Plus, and in short, I loved them. This is the adaptation that we the fans have been waiting for over 10 years now. But I wanted to break down each of the episodes individually and explain what worked or didn't work about each of them. Starting off with episode 1. I actually love the opening montage as we get an intro to Percy's character and the nature of the world, and we see some examples of the mist working. It's a good way to accomplish what the opening monologue of the book did, but in visual form. This intro also accomplishes a couple of other things, like name-dropping mytho-magic and introducing us to Grover's character, and establishing his friendship with Percy right off the bat. Next up we have the scene in the museum, as well as some clever foreshadowing from Sally, where she says that just because you look like a hero doesn't necessarily make you a hero. We also get some examples of how Percy can get distracted and lost in his own thoughts easily. Definitely a portrayal of his ADHD. And we get the scene of Miss Dodds' attack. In the book, Percy actually needed to get led off to a secluded place, and then he was tossed the sword by Mr. Brunner, who was later revealed to be Chiron, and then he kills Miss Dodds, and after the fact, he was gaslighted into believing this didn't happen. In the show, we do get to see Nancy Bobofit dragged into the fountain just as she was in the book, foreshadowing what Percy's powers are going to be. Anyways, Percy kills Miss Dodds, and Uncle Rick cameo in the expulsion scene. The next scene happens to be one of my favorites in the entire episode. Percy, Gabe, and Sally. We get to see an example of Gabe's anger before we even see him, but the best part of the scene is when Sally enters. She's just wonderful. Just a warm presence that comforts Percy after he had a horrible day, and probably a horrible year as well. Definitely the only ray of sunshine he has in his life. Also, I love the conversation between Sally and Gabe, as she manages to convince him to let them go on vacation. It also demonstrates just how abusive and controlling Gabe is with both of them. As well as the blue food, giving us an origin of this specific piece of blue food, as we're going to be seeing it more throughout the show apparently. Also, Sally noting that the storm is angry is quite the clever piece of foreshadowing. But next comes the biggest change from the book in the entire episode. The fact that Sally actually reveals the truth about Percy's heritage and the truth about the Greek mythological world before he gets to Camp Half-Blood. Despite how much this changes, it actually kind of works for the TV show because it reveals the premise before the first episode ends. Something that actually kind of works better for a TV show where a person might just watch the first episode and then stop, compared to when you buy a book and you already have the whole book. But not only does it work as an adaptational choice, it works so well for the emotions of the scene and the characters as they were established. Next up we have the Minotaur attack, and Grover revealing some more things to Percy. Anyways, the conversation between Percy and Sally, when they're about to go split up during the Minotaur attack, took a little longer than I would have expected. And I was wondering, wow, the Minotaur must be pretty slow. But it also contains some clever setup and payoff here, with Sally using the words she told Percy about earlier when she was explaining his namesake to him. Also, it fits so well that Percy's coat is red in this scene. This chapter in the book was called My Mother Teaches Me Bullfighting. Anyways, when Percy actually fights the Minotaur, it takes a bit longer than it did in the book, and I actually kind of like this. Again, with this being a TV show, you need to give the viewer a taste of what's going to come, and giving them some extra action here might actually be for the best. Anyways, now we have something that I didn't expect to have much to say about. The credits. I have not seen this much foreshadowing, or spoilers depending on how you look at it, since I last left off JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but that's a video for another day. Overall, really good. I really enjoyed this episode. It embodies the spirit of the story so well, and the characters are absolutely my favorite part of this adaptation. So far, at least. You understand their motivations, their personality, and their relationships within the story. Anyways, episode 2 starts off, and we have characters saying some of their most iconic lines from the books. Annabeth says you drool in your sleep before we even get to see her face properly, and Mr. D calls Percy Peter Johnson. But one change from the book I wasn't expecting was Mr. D tricking Percy into thinking that he was his son, in an attempt to get some alcohol. I thought that joke was a bit cringe initially, and then Chiron told Percy it's because demigods can do favors for gods that gods cannot accomplish on their own, which is actually a really clever bit of world building and foreshadowing for the story as a whole. And I know I called the joke cringe initially, but in retrospect, it's hilarious. Anyways, once we get to see more of camp, I love the details here. The strawberry bushes that they used to fund the camp, as well as setting up Luke as Percy's friend. And also the detail that he offers Percy some sympathy, likely due to the hardships that he has experienced, and that Percy initially thought it was bullying since he's used to that from basically everyone except for Grover and his mom. And with this episode's major change to the books, we have Grover visiting a dryad, presumably Juniper, right before he goes to the Council of Cloven Elders. And it turns out that Grover, Chiron, and Mr. D all know that Sally is alive, and they're actively keeping it from Percy. A bold choice, and one that I found a little off-putting, but it's paid off super well later in the episode. But I'll get to that in a minute. And we have another dream sequence where Percy hears an evil voice from deep within the earth trying to entice his resentment towards his father. Book readers know who this is. Later in the episode, we see another clever detail as Percy goes in for his first day of training, that he has a necklace with no beads on it because this is his first year at camp. And Clarice is a bully. Except I actually really like the motivation she was given in this adaptation. She resents Percy for supposedly being able to take on the Minotaur, even though he looks and seems like a total loser. Next thing, before Percy even exits the bathroom, is that Annabeth is finally introduced. And she was scouting him for Capture the Flag. An interesting change, but I'll roll with it. And we check back in with Luke, and we get some foreshadowing on the Oath of the Big Three and Thalia. We don't quite hear of Thalia again in this episode, but after what I've seen the show do so far, with characters and their motivations, I'm interested to see how they're going to use that reveal later on in the season. Moving on to the Capture the Flag game, Annabeth and Percy are hitting it off awkwardly, to say the least. Also, Percy's ADHD causing him to do a bunch of stupid things, including flossing on top of the rock Annabeth set him to guard, is absolutely hilarious. But as I'm sure we all know, Clarice shows back up with every intention to maim Percy despite the rules set out. Percy runs away, fights Clarice off, and then Annabeth pushes him into the water once the game is over. Did she figure out what his parentage was? Guess that makes some sense, though it's a bit odd that she would force him into revealing it, knowing about the Oath of the Big Three and the trouble it's going to cause him. I wonder how they're going to tackle that later on. And remember what I said earlier about Grover keeping the truth about Sally from Percy? Well, Percy resents his father and decides he isn't going to go on the quest for him, but when Grover reveals that Sally is still alive, Percy is willing to go on the quest. I actually like this change. This episode as a whole had a lot of characters with motivations that made a lot more sense than even their book counterparts. And Percy finding out that Sally is still alive at this point in the story gave it a lot more weight than it had in the book. And in keeping with him resenting his dad, it's Sally that motivates him to go on the quest. And to top things off, apparently this show is going to have each episode end with a trailer for the next one. And we get to see that Miss Dodds is still alive. So, overall thoughts, some events are different from the books, but most importantly, the characters are very true to their book counterparts. And like I said, with episode 2 specifically, I love how their motivations were very clear and they made sense for the story. It seems this show is going to be even more character-driven than the books, and I'm on board for that. Overall, this show is everything I hoped it would be, and arguably even more. And I could not be more excited for the rest of the season. I am Kieran Mythos, signing off.